All right, we're recording, and very happy to have with us today Dr. Jen Unwin, who's a consultant clinical health psychologist and has been working in the NHS for over 30 years, helping people with chronic illness to live well with their conditions. She's researched into the importance of hope in health and well-being, and recently collaborated with her husband, Dr. David Unwin, to support patients in primary care to manage their diabetes, with making lasting changes to their sugar consumption to improve their condition and reduce medication. Jen's been actively involved with the British Psychological Society, of which she's a fellow, and also the UK Association for Solution-Focused Practice, of which she's a past chair. Welcome.
Truth. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on.
And the PHC and diabetes.co.uk do quite a bit with them as well.
Great.
Yeah, it's nice to meet through the ether finally, after having messaged a lot about various festivals that are up and coming.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe we could mention that more or less first. I mean, I first became aware of you probably about 3 years ago. I kind of became aware of Zoe Harcombe and you and other people who are involved in the public health collaboration around then, and started to hear this message to eat real food. And it was an interesting one because I think quite a lot of the time you get this kind of dogmatic approach to nutrition, and it could come from carnivores or vegans or whatever, but the message is quite kind of forceful and maybe preachy.
Emotional. Yeah.
Definitely emotional. And you can understand where that comes from for any group, because it's a really personal and important thing in life, and so it's bound to be connected to all sorts of different emotional drives.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, receiving that message is a huge turn off for I would say most people. So to hear a message that's eat real food, it's not very controversial, it's not dogmatic, it's it seems sensible, and I suppose the only thing that would be kind of the only major question that would come up is, what is real food?
What is real food? Yeah. And it's what can we all agree on? Because like you say, there's loads of disagreement and high emotion, but actually, if you sit down and talk to people, there's actually quite a lot of overlap. It's almost like sort of consensus politics. And if you can actually get in the same room as people and talk to them, I think we can all agree that who's going to deny a high sugar diet is not how we evolved, and is there's loads of evidence now. I think everyone's going to agree with that, whether you're vegan, vegetarian, or carnivore. Like eating a real food diet should be about minimizing those kind of refined sugars. That is something that looks like it is really bad for your physical and mental health, and we see that the evidence of that all around us, don't we? So and I think there's the diet issue, but there's also the whole environmental issue, isn't there, about how we produce food as well, and the farmers and what they're trying to do, and what difference that can make to our health and quality of life. So I suppose that's the message behind the Real Food Rocks Festival. Really, was how can we be a bit more? So lots of what you see in the media is, don't eat this, don't eat that, it's going to give you cancer, that's going to give you cancer. It's all like, what can you eat? If we all focus on this idea of real food, or as Zoe loves to say, doesn't it? Was it running around or growing or swimming recently? Is one way to look at it. Or David always says, probably if it's in a packet or you saw it advertised on the television, broadly, those aren't normally real foods if someone's trying to sell it to you as a product kind of thing. And the PHC has had academic conferences, and those are great because you get to hear from people like Zoe and other people who are the scientists, and also the doctors like David, But it's more of a, sometimes we do get members of the general public who kind of believe in that sort of low carb paleo kind of way of eating, but it is mostly academic and doctors. So the idea behind the festival was to do something a bit more public facing, which can sort of say, let's celebrate, British food production, healthy fresh food, how you can eat and not have loads of refined carbs and sugars and industrial oils, and just to sort of celebrate that really and bring everybody together from the community, just to have fun. And I kind of it was partly because I was a bit jealous of Keto Fest. I don't know if you've heard of Keto Fest in the States, and I've always quite wanted to go there. I thought, oh, why can't we have one in the UK that's a bit more like that? And I've been involved a bit with organising conferences, for my professional body and so on. So I knew a little bit about organising events. So we're about less than a month out now, and I think we're all good. And you're coming yourselves, of course, which we're really excited about. So that's how it came up. Yeah.
This is so Real Food Rocks, and it's in, I don't know if I'm saying it right, Brathay Hall. Brathay
Hall, which is just outside Ambleside. Really, it's a short walk from Ambleside, if people know that, in the Lake District. We've had some people say, oh, it's a little bit inaccessible for the Southerners, which I guess is the case, but you're never going to please everybody. Plus the ethos of Brathay was perfect for us because they're all about young people's well-being, and I think that's something we're all a bit concerned about, and the rising rates of obesity and even type 2 diabetes in young people. And so it's a family focused event. It's so the location, as I say, is a charity that's about young people's well-being. So it seemed to fit really well, and they were really keen to have us. So that was why Brathay, and it's absolutely beautiful, right by the shores of Windermere. So if something's on our side, we'll have good weather, and there's a lovely hall. So we have got speakers actually, but they'll be obviously kind of I've tried to ask people not to have not too many PowerPoint presentations, but more just engagement with the people that are coming. So we've got Dr. Michael Mosley and his wife, Dr. Claire Bailey, who's a GP. And we've got Asim Malhotra that lots of people will know about. Obviously David's been roped in. There's loads of speakers on different topics, and we've got activities. So I don't know if you know Daryl Edwards, do you, who's the Probable Play guy. He's coming to do a family kind of fun movement session, which will be great. And there's a little fun run that's so all the things are suitable for families to get involved in. Real food producers, so we've got Thornby Moor Dairy, we've got the Horn Beef Company, who are amazing, who kind of they produce kind of wild beef almost. Their cows kind of roam in the Lake District on I think it's Sizer Estate. They'll be coming on down to talk and hopefully sell some of their produce and talk about their ethos of just the quality and kind of raising real food in an ethical way. So yes, lots of fun will be had. Hopefully.
Fantastic. Yeah, so it sounds like a kind of combination of a kind of learning day for people who maybe are healthcare professionals, or they're just interested in knowing how changing what you eat can affect your health, and a kind of combination of that and actually the experience of eating food like that, and with Daryl Edwards, moving, exercising in a way that's fun and a way for everyone who's kind of found this community online to meet and
to come together. A giant party. So we've got there's about, I think there'll be about 500 people there already during the day. So we'll see how the numbers go as the time goes on. Might be a bit weather dependent, but so just a way of sort of celebrating and how far we've come really, because David and I weren't doing this at all sort of I think it's about 6 or 7 years now since we personally went low carb, found low carb, and then decided to collaborate on the project that happens in his practice, which is helping the patients there with pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, but also other metabolic related conditions like fatty liver and
what's that one?
fatty liver,
Fatty liver. Yeah, got it.
Yeah. To reverse their conditions and be healthier. So we started that about 6 or 7 years ago, and at the time, I mean, you'll perhaps remember yourself, it was quite sort of controversial, really. Whereas now, there's a lot more acceptance from, for example, some of David's infographics have just been approved by NICE, which is the National Institute for Clinical Excellence.
Yeah. So these are the infographics where it has everyday food items, which ultimately get broken down into glucose for use by the body, but people don't generally think of them as potentially going to spike their blood sugar in a way that might, if you're not healthy, if you're not metabolically healthy, if you're not fit and well, then you could eat these things like potatoes and bread and cause yourself some real damage over time.
Yeah. So the idea was it's sort of how to be public facing about that information and how to put it in a way that people understand. And so it's probably beyond me to explain it, but it's to do with the glycemic index and the glycemic load and calculating how many equivalents of teaspoons of sugar, which is something that people do understand. So if you said to somebody, would you just eat 8 teaspoons of sugar? They'd throw their hands up in horror. But so when you know that there's 6 teaspoons of sugar in a banana, people are always really surprised by that, because people think bananas are healthy snacks. And I used to eat maybe 2, I mean, that wouldn't have been unusual for me to eat 2 bananas a day, thinking I was doing a marvelous thing and wondering why I was getting bigger and bigger, because I was following the sort of received wisdom. So it's information for people. So the way we work is give people information and explanations and choice and some and hope, because they see other people who've done fantastically well in the practice, and we're still sort of running groups, and that's the side I help on, really, which is sort of how do you run the groups, how do you kind of communicate with people, and then obviously David provides the knowledge and the information, and then feedback's incredibly important. So people see how well they're doing because we can print them out graphs, or they get weighed if they want to, they measure the weight if they want to, that kind of thing. And so over the 6 or 7 years, that's been an incredibly successful project. And David now has, I think the latest is 61 people who've managed to put their diabetes into remission, and he'd never seen that in the previous 25 years of giving the kind of normal advice. So it's been a fantastic project. It's very positive, and some of the patients from kind of the beginning are still engaged, still helping new people coming through, and some of them still losing weight. We've got people who've lost maybe 6 stone, those kind of large amounts, who are still improving.
That's amazing.
Their conditions. Yeah,
it's an amazing story. I mean, he's kind of at the kind of spearhead of a larger group of doctors now that's getting into doing that. And when I first heard about him, it was through one of Ivor Cummins' videos, and I think part of the way it was framed was he saved his practice tens of thousands of pounds in diabetes medication
alone. Yes, so it's in the high 50s, I think, £1,000 a year on diabetes medications alone, by adopting this new approach, which is cheap as chips, because it's just changing the advice. And we run a group on a Monday night, but not every Monday, and also, of course, his partners are starting to do it now in the practice, nurses. So, but yeah, incredible kind of savings on those drugs. But he's also seen people coming off hypertensive medications. On the whole, their cholesterol's improve as well, and also some really notable cases of people improving their mental health and being able to come off really long-term, kind of antidepressants. So that's fantastic to see. It's wonderful to see those people over the weeks, how they change and improve. Yeah.
Well, that's something I was going to ask you is your background is clinical psychology, and how does that specialism get easier or more difficult depending on what your patients eat?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a difficult one to answer, really. Although you do, because obviously when I was practicing as a psychologist, I wasn't able to give people nutritional advice. I mean, occasionally I would signpost them if they sort of came up and they were interested. I would signpost them to some evidence and resources. But it wasn't for me to kind of to give advice. But
that's interesting. So you don't was it that you weren't allowed, or was it that you felt it wasn't your place, or what?
I think as a professional in one profession, you've got certain sort of skills and competencies, if you like. And because I've never trained in nutrition or have any medical training, it wouldn't be right for me to give that kind of advice. But as I say, you can to some extent signpost people if they were talking about being interested in nutrition. But having said that, I know that I mean, there's part of the frustration, really, and I'm actually now retired from the NHS, so there's perhaps other trainings that I can do or kind of possibilities there, but definitely I had looked at the evidence for things. So things like now, so I work with people with physical health problems, and sometimes that would be things like heart disease, diabetes, chronic pain, and helping people to sort of manage those conditions. And latterly, definitely kind of looking at the evidence for things like fibromyalgia, which I don't know if you know about that condition, but it's like a chronic pain condition with pain in the joints and so on. There's now evidence coming out that it does look like that might be, influenced by sugar and sort of metabolic problems. And also there was already some evidence that if people with fibromyalgia go gluten-free, a proportion of them will be significantly better. So there is definitely, in my view, an overlap between mental health and physical health. And we just noticed it ourselves in terms of how much more kind of just lively and awake your brain feels if you're eating clean. And since we cut out lots of carbs and starches, and definitely feel more awake and energetic, and have seen, as I say, in David's practice, people who adopted the kind of low carb lifestyle, who that wasn't the reason they were doing it. They were usually doing it because they were type 2 diabetes or fatty liver or some other condition, but a side effect was that their mental health was massively improved. So, I mean, obviously it's not the case for everyone, but I think there is a really big effect of that. And you'll have come across Georgia Ede, will you? She's a psychiatrist in the States who's written a lot about this. If people want to look at her stuff, she's written a lot about the mental health benefits of cutting out sugar. Plus, there's loads of other conditions that we all know. I mean, we get a bit boring, don't we? Because we say, oh, you can cure this and that. But, there's, I'm a migraineur, so I get used to get a lot of migraines. And over the years, I've managed to kind of work out various ways of not having that. And Angela Stanton has written a lot about people who get migraine, and how, cutting out sugar is one of the first things that you need to do there, to have more salt. And of course, that's something that everybody goes, more salt, you're going to die. But most of us have very low blood pressure. So actually, we, in a way, to function, we need higher salt. So, you tweak these things over the years, don't you, personally? And then, it just makes you look into all these different angles of what so many different conditions that can be influenced by nutrition, which I really believe, and Dave and I get a bit boring about it.
Yeah, I, that's like, for me, I feel like it's a big danger of communicating anything about diet, even if you do it in a considered way, because it's easy to find someone who says that a different diet from the one you're talking about will do the same miracle things.
Uh-huh.
But I
Yeah.
mean, I suppose all you can do is kind of bear witness and express
Yeah.
yourself. And if people don't
I
want to hear it,
it's
then
definitely encouraging people to. We always do this, like, but even within low carb, there's so many variations, aren't there? You know, yes, your paleo and your carnivore and your whatever. I think the only thing to encourage people to do is to experiment on themselves. So you're your own. We're all unique, aren't we? Yeah. So I have a tendency to migraine, and I've got that kind of metabolism, and somebody else is something else. And you know, how often you eat, what you eat. You have to sort of pay attention to when do you feel at your best, or if it's either weight loss or you know, what is the improvement you're seeking,
mm,
and try something for a few weeks and see if it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. That's so I, you know, we always say that to people. And obviously David in his practice will trial people dairy free or trial people gluten free, and then review and see. And sometimes it doesn't make any difference, well then you carry on. And sometimes it makes a massive difference, well then you've found something. And because if that was a thing you were kind of suffering from, that you're going to stick to it. So people often say to us, well, people don't stick to low carb or keto or, you know, the paleo diet. Well, those people in the practice have, because if they didn't, they were sick and ill. So for them, that's their motivation. And that's what I'm interested in, obviously, is helping people to find their motivation, and then to sort of change habits, make it a lifestyle so it is enduring. But that'll only work if people do notice a difference, it's right for them. And you do find that it just sort of you know, over time, over those 7 years, most of our family is now only because they've seen us, may have nagged them a little bit, but mostly because they've seen us do it, they've actually had a go, and they feel better. David's mom's got type 2 diabetes, but she more or less eats low carb now. And lots of other people that we kind of come across in the community say, oh, I saw that stuff that you do, and we had a go, and, you know, lost a stone. And so, don't know, you probably find that as well, that it does actually filter out over time, because people are interested to watch, you know, how you've done, and they have a go and they feel better, and then it's a bit of a no-brainer, really.
yeah, absolutely. And that, I found that for sure, that members of my family have given it a try. Others kind of find it much more difficult. I think, in a way, I've said this before, that it's a bit of a blessing to have very immediate
Yes.
kind of negative
Yeah.
consequences
Feedback. Yeah. Yeah.
to you know, because I actually suffer from migraines as well. And
Mm.
so when I was a child, they were so bad, sometimes I would just like have to, you know, lie down where I was, and even if I was sitting in the kitchen, because otherwise I thought I was going to be sick, and it was just terrible. So,
Yeah.
and actually, strangely, the only doctor that got close to working out what it was a homeopath. And
Mm.
I think that homeopathic medicine, the actual medicine they give you, is not effective, and that it's effectively just sugar pill, that it's you know, so diluted that it's not going to work. And I think some of the traditions they have around hitting the medicine on a horsehair pillow and stuff like that, it's bizarre that they still
Yeah.
do that.
But
But
do you know what placebo is? So I'm quite interested in hope, as you know, and placebo. So placebo is incredibly effective. So if somebody believed that it worked, or that kind of ceremony was meaningful to them, and they believed it was going to help them, then you know, quite a few times that does actually help people with some.
yeah,
So yeah. But anyway, so your migraine much better now.
yeah, I mean, the homeopath started talking about an elimination diet, and what they got
Mm.
slightly wrong was, I think, the gold standard, which is what I ended up doing, and finding that low carb was really helpful, was you cut out everything that could be a problem, not one thing. Because if you cut out one thing, then you might miss the fact that there's two or three things that are the problem, and you'll never know. So what, sort of more broadly, what do you think is maybe the reason that, or reasons that healthcare professionals, maybe even the sort of wider public, just don't think about trying these things?
Good question. So I think there is quite a lot of received wisdom about nutrition, isn't there? That more and more you kind of think, well, where's that? How has that information got into the psyche of the general public about breakfast is the most important meal of the day? One example. So there's loads of things that actually 7 years ago I would have thought there was super hard evidence for, and that's why I was doing it. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I never eat breakfast now. I kind of truly believe that was put about by the cereal companies. There's no evidence that that's the case. Our blood sugars tend to be high in the morning anyway. Most of us aren't actually that hungry. I mean, if you are, great. And if you need to, there's exceptions, aren't there? But it's quite freeing to know that you don't need to. Right, so breakfast is the most important meal of the day. The other received wisdom is eat little and often. I mean, again, who was that put about by? The snack companies. That's actually the opposite of what now we can kind of understand, because if insulin's the problem and every time you eat you're getting some insulin going around the system, well, that you can see the logic then that isn't actually, it's actually better to eat less often and have periods where you're just managing your own blood sugars in that way. So eat little often. Carbs with every meal. Eat low fat. Eat low salt. Well, I do completely the opposite now and feel, I'm 55, feel better than I did in my 20s when I was trying to eat low fat. I was just hungry all the time. Trying to have low fat, low salt, eating little and often. For my personal metabolism, that was a disaster. So so why don't people? I think people think they're being healthy. I thought I was doing my best and trying to be healthy. So why don't they try other things? I think the other big elephant in the room, which I'm also incredibly interested in, is sugar addiction, which I completely believe exists because I'm one myself. And I think that those are the people who struggle to imagine going low carb. Sometimes if they do, they feel great, but then sticking to it is a challenge because of the environment that we live in, where we're just the world's so sugar centric now, isn't it? Everywhere you go to the garage, every celebration, it's all over the workplaces, it's in the cinema. You hardly go anywhere where you're not bombarded with just a little bit, or there's somebody trying to give you a cupcake. So it does take a complete mental shift to think that you're going to live. For most people to think that you're going to live, and they usually, when you say you're low carb, they say, "What do you eat then?" Like there's nothing left to eat. So I think for some people, it's a massive shift, and even if they want to do it, they really struggle with giving up. And I think if you're a proper sugar addict, you do have to just say, a bit like you wouldn't say to an alcoholic, just one little whiskey, I'll be fine. We all know that you wouldn't do that. And so if you you can be proper, drop off the wagon if you have one cupcake. It could be the start of some well, in the beginning we used to at Christmas say, well, it's okay because it's Christmas, but that would actually lead into a couple of months afterwards of trying to kind of get back on the wagon of healthy eating, because once you kind of let rip, it's hard. That was only the first couple of years. Now we do a lovely low carb Christmas. So and it's much easier as time goes by. More members of the family are doing it. We've learned how to go on holiday and not eat loads of sugar and carbohydrate, but still have a great time. There's ways of living and treating yourself and really having a celebration that just aren't about sugar. But I think that takes quite a long time. It's very ingrained in my life and our family that sugar was a treat and a reward and something that was comforting. And, you know, a lot of us are massive foodies as well, aren't we? That have found low carb. We've kind of, it's because we love our food actually, and it's just about refocusing the kinds of things that we, the way that we do meals. And I think some of these things can take, you know, I'm still learning. I'm sure you are as well. It's the sort of things that take years to refine actually, and you know, keep yourself at your best.
Yeah, it's a real cultural thing, and I think acknowledging alcohol addiction as a problem is fairly new. You know, you still see Simpsons episodes from the early 90s, and you know, alcoholics would be the butt of jokes in a way that, in a light-hearted way, that now just wouldn't be acceptable. And I think, I'm not saying that sugar addiction is on the same level as alcohol addiction, but in terms of the amount of pain it causes. But I mean, if you look at people getting diabetic limb amputations or dying prematurely, then, you know,
or just
there is
that
an
the
argument.
quality of life issue of being extremely overweight, or trying to manage that addiction by either exercising or you know, I think it can cause a lot of distress. I mean, I think it's and also, you know, some people sometimes these sort of can be conditions that are sort of linked. So I've heard Karen Thompson speak about how she started as a child, you know, that was how she began. It was almost like her gateway drug was being sugar addicted. And then, of course, as you get older, then you have access to alcohol or other drugs. And sometimes people coming off or trying to, you know, avoid alcohol will find that they transition to having more sugary things. And we know that people who give up smoking tend to put on weight, don't they? Because they tend to eat more sugar. So I think there's a kind of link in the brain chemistry about reward and addiction and comfort, and then of course sometimes there's sort of really difficult emotional issues underneath why people are eating, and why as children they started to do that. So yeah, so I agree with you. There are people who do really suffer, and it can end up, you know, where people have got really serious health conditions and they still can't. It's like smoking, isn't it? You know, people who've got COPD and can't stop smoking, it's the same. You know, the people with really uncontrolled type 2 diabetes who are still struggling not to have sugar and carbohydrate.
Yeah, there's I'm thinking about Stefan Guyenet and Robert Lustig over in the States, who both kind of urge people to avoid the momentary pleasure and aim for longer term happiness. But I think where they get it wrong is that real food is actually hedonistic, and it makes you extremely happy in the moment as well as in the longer term. It's just learning and learning the foods that, you know, that don't make you ill over the longer term, and staying away from them.
And don't trigger overeating. So personally speaking, let's say you could say that technically low carb, it's okay to have peanut butter, couldn't you? And lots of keto people eat loads of nut butters and things. I can't moderate that stuff.
Me neither. It's like crack.
It's like got the jar, got the spoon, we're off. So again, it's about being honest with yourself, observing your own reactions to things, including how much of it you end up eating, if that's what you're not wanting. And unless you're wanting to put on weight, then go for it, because that is, some people do want to, don't they? So engineering your environment so we now don't have peanut butter in the house. I've just eliminated it from our shopping list, and that solves that problem. Some people have a similar problem with cheese.
Yeah, me too. I do.
Yeah. So likewise, I have to moderate that. Or we discovered recently that cheese actually, it creates like morphine-like substances as it gets digested. I don't know if you knew that. So that's
Yeah, castle morphine.
Yeah, partly why people like it, and partly why some people haven't made the link. But if you have a problem with constipation, sometimes it's cheese related, because you kind of getting morphine in your bowel kind of thing. So it's worth a try of being cheese free if you suffer with that, or if you can't moderate it. Yeah. So even within low carb, again, it's this thing about refining it over years. So we have less cheese, or maybe only on certain occasions, and then yeah, definitely the nut butters are gone. Tragic. Yeah.
It's so funny how, like, I think for anyone listening who's kind of a general listener who's not in the bubble of nutrition or low carb or anything like that, you start to get into the minutiae of like what foods are, sometimes a problem for people and what foods aren't, and they're like, what, nuts, cheese, hang on, but isn't that part of the whole thing? And I think like there's layers and layers to it all. And
that's it's your own journey in a way, isn't it? The real food principles are the kind of umbrella, and then within that, there's as many variations as there are people doing it, really, in terms of when you eat, how often you eat, what makes a meal, what makes what keeps you feeling at your best. That's the sort of personal journey. And I think we all start with the kind of cutting out the sugar and the carbs, and then it kind of it refines after that, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. And I think like for a lot of folk, it's probably just interesting to hear kind of a lighter touch way of doing it, so you don't have to go all in. I know that there's a lot of people who advocate kind of the 80-20 type thing. Yeah, exactly. yeah, that's it. Steak and water. And for some people that seems to, change their life. And for other people it's probably unnecessary.
They like that. I'm a bit all or nothing. So I did try Sean's, so sometimes that appeals to people, just the simplicity, and I'm going to do it. And, for some people that actually suits their model. For other people, it is just about a slow transfer and experimentation and giving things up. David was a lot more like that than myself. Initially, I did go like super low carb, just did it initially. And he had to transition from, he used to eat a lot of biscuits to cope with difficult patients. So he'd have them in his drawer, and some people were like 3 biscuit patients and stuff like that. So transitioned onto oat cakes, which was a kind of step down, and then he went on to almonds in the drawer. Now he doesn't have anything at all, but that did actually take him, maybe 2 years transitioning over, just noticing that he was better without. And people have different approaches, and that's fine as well. I think we all tend to want a quick fix, and somebody tell me what to eat. Give me everyone's obsessed, aren't they, with meal plan, or give me in a shake, and I don't have to think. But I think actually long term, it does involve a lot of thinking and experimenting and honestly noticing, to just keep getting to the stuff that suits you. And I think the other thing that really helps is just to think, well, did we evolve to eat that stuff? We probably didn't evolve to eat pecan, like peanut nut butter in the, probably some of my ancestors came from here. We didn't have peanuts, did we? Didn't have potatoes, actually, if you come to think of it, did we? They didn't grow here, thousands of years ago. So just thinking, well, what did we evolve to eat? I think does really help. And that's why I'm personally not really I'm definitely not pro sweeteners, but that's personally because that just keeps my kind of sugar cravings going. So finally managed to, that took a long time as well, finally learning that sweeteners weren't the best thing for me. But we didn't have paleo cupcakes, did we? And we didn't, so I think sometimes people try, and I can understand it as a transition. So sweeteners, as a way of giving up sugar, because that is tough. So that's a help. Try and think of it like methadone. You know, if you're giving up drugs, you know, maybe methadone's better than the drugs. But obviously, the ultimate aim is to come off that as well. So yeah, I think it's getting out of that, which is so ingrained, the cake culture, the treat culture. Have a little paleo cupcake.
Yeah.
If you can try and not think of those things as food and nutrition, but try and think as real food on a plate as a meal. Your protein, your veg, although, you know, there's debate about that, isn't there? How much personally people need, and some people react to that stuff as well. That's hence why some of the carnivore people do so well, isn't it? And, you know, some sort of good dietary fat, and see what works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Personal experimentation seems to be the main thing that's coming out of it. You've done research yourself on how the level of hope that a patient has can change the outcome for them. Can you tell me about that?
Hinting about the placebo. We all know that works, and there's lots of evidence that actually, and that's why they have to put a placebo control into a medical trial, so that, say, a new tablet for irritable bowel syndrome, you have to give some people the tablet and some people a placebo, because we know that in conditions that are to some extent influenced by stress, etc., will, you know, you get quite a powerful placebo effect. Sometimes up to about 70% of the effect will be people's hopefulness that that's going to be something that's going to help them, and then they tend to notice, oh, well, that is a bit better, and that makes them more hopeful. And obviously with antidepressants as well, they have to do those kinds of trials. So the placebo effect is the kind of hopefulness people have that a certain thing that you're going to do with them or they're going to do will get them to a better place, kind of thing. So my doctorate research actually was with patients who were having lower limb amputations, and I sort of followed them up over 6 months to see who did better in terms of their quality of life. So got back to, you know, feeling happy, being able to do what they wanted to do, adjusting to having this, you know, kind of trauma and disfigurement. And it was the people who were more hopeful type people at the beginning, and that's because they tend to engage better with the advice about the physio. They tend to get back into their social networks and so on. So people who are hopeful usually have goals. They have a sense that they can take the steps that they need to kind of meet those goals. And so the idea being, right, well, if higher hope people tend to do better, how can we teach people who are feeling more hopeless or don't naturally have those kind of personalities, can we teach them to be more hopeful and hence cope better with any kind of challenge, really? But health challenges was obviously my area that I was working in. So that translates, say, in the practice project, is always asking people about what their goals are, what their best hopes are. You need something to kind of be working towards and to notice progress towards. When people are very hopeless, they don't have a sense of a positive future. It's more often not, they have a sense of a negative future, and then they're just trying to kind of avoid bad things happening. So it's a sort of how do you get people to work proactively to a future that they want? And of course that applies to, say, changing your lifestyle, doesn't it? Because you've got to put, if you're going to put in the effort to take those steps, you need to know that it's leading somewhere where you feel your life would be better. So David always starts by asking people, you know, what are your best hopes for coming to talk to me today, and getting stuff like, people nearly always say things like they want to feel more energetic, they want to feel more cheerful, they want to be able to run around with their grandkids. Those are the sorts of things that, you know, people to breathe easier so that they can do more sorts of things that people talk about. And then you're going to help them notice, you know, if they make just like the self-experimentation thing, well, if they, you know, give up whatever it is and come back in 2 weeks, what have they noticed? Are they getting any nearer? Is it any better? Or do we need to tweak that? But it's the sort of it's the sort of lighthouse, the light at the end of the tunnel, that you're working together to get people towards. More often than not, doctors tend to have their own goals, and they think that people should lose weight or they should take their tablets, or that's going to be hopeless if that isn't what the patient's hoping for. You have to be traveling together. So that's kind of a summary of it, really, is that how to help people be more hopeful and make changes, and then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That makes a lot of sense, and it kind of works with the idea that kind of the nutrition advice that most doctors have been giving for the last however many years, 50 years, is far less likely to succeed. And I think if you're working with a doctor, my experience of doctors has been mixed. You know, for some things they've been excellent, and for other things not so. And so my trust level was, you know, somewhere in the middle. And if you can really trust someone who's an authority on a subject to work with you, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a mentor at work, or anything really, whether it's one of your parents when you're young, then you develop this sense of hope in collaboration, and then ultimately you've got their voice in your head permanently, and that's where you can draw on to be hopeful about future outcomes. And I suppose it's a very powerful psychology for people who it doesn't really, I'm sure it shows up more on a lower socioeconomic level, where people are maybe less likely to attain the education levels that they might want, or the health levels that they might want, where hope is in shorter supply. And I guess it's not something you can just click your fingers and say, there's a box of hope, I hope you feel much better now. It's a very deep thing.
Absolutely. I couldn't have summarized. It's really nice how you've summarized it. Yeah, it's something about somebody with expertise, but is helping you to where you want to go. So it's somebody humble with expertise who doesn't think that they know best, helping you in your preferred direction. That's where the magic happens, because you're working together towards something that you both want, really. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, mentors. Yeah, Russell Brand's just written a book called Mentors, and I must read it.
Yeah, I like him, and he's had Dr. Gabor Mate on his podcast, who's brilliant, and I've followed for years, partly because I suspected that I had ADHD and then was diagnosed with it, and then felt like I'd basically got rid of it by changing the way I ate. But Gabor Mate's got some fascinating things to say about that, and I feel like the causes are multifactorial. I think stuff can happen in your childhood which makes it harder for you to focus on what's at hand. I also think that there's just sort of physical genetic predispositions to certain types of environmental toxins like food, where if you go off piste with that stuff, then you just have the same symptoms. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got psychological scarring, but it can do. And I think Russell Brand's very, very good at kind of teasing out the psychology of what helps and what hurts.
Yeah, and also that, you know, that there's great. It's a bit like dyslexia, isn't it? Because David's dyslexic, and two of the kids. It's kind of seen as a problem, but actually, it's fantastically rich. That kind of way that their brains work, in some ways, is in some situations, is fantastically useful and better than the kind of normie brain. And I think that's also the same, isn't it, with people with ADHD and who might be on the spectrum, that there's areas in which they would beat other people all the time on their kind of skills and abilities. And there's environments that you can put yourself in where people like that would thrive, you know. And it's that thing about people with dyslexia often make fantastic entrepreneurs because they can see the big picture and they're very sociable often. So I think, you know, things can be seen as problematic, but they're only problematic sometimes in modern life, and that probably there was a role for people with different kinds of brains in the tribe. And it's finding your niche, isn't it? And accepting, you know, like we've been talking, right? Well, accepting that, you know, I can't be at my best if I eat sugar. So is that accepting that, you know, maybe there's certain kinds of roles and jobs that don't suit me if I'm dyslexic or if I've got a tendency to ADHD, but there's other things that I'd be really good at because other people can't do things that I can do. So it's helping your children and your clients and other people that you come across to sort of be at their best, really, and not necessarily think that they're the way they are in the world is a problem, because in some situations it can be a gift.
Yeah, I love that about how different people in the tribe would specialize. I think that's so true. And you know, evolution tries everything. So, you know, we're only here because all of our ancestors survived, and they must have survived for a reason. And that includes all the neural circuits and all the stuff that's going on in the brain. So yeah, no, I love that way of thinking.
Angela Stanton says this, that migraine brains are very, very they're lively, and that's why they kind of spark out occasionally, and why you need more salt, particularly overnight, because even overnight you kind of your lively brain, and that really rang true to me. You know, that I wake up in the morning and I'm busy thinking what's next. You know, it's always full on until, you know, about 9 o'clock when I'm just lights out. It's just so there's lots of different kinds of brain, aren't there?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it was really great talking. Where can people find tickets for Real Food Rocks?
Okay, realfoodrocks.co.uk, or on Twitter as Real Food Rocks UK, or on Instagram, I think it's something like that. If you put in Real Food Rocks, and we're on Facebook as well. Unfortunately, the evening tickets are already sold out unless we decide to release some more, but the day tickets are still available. So go along there and see what's on the schedule and where the location is, and it'd be great to see as many people there as we can.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks again, Jen.
Thanks, Ali. Really enjoyed it.
See you soon.
See you soon. Bye now.